James felt his heart race as he stood at the base of the Eiffel Tower, looking up at the towering spires that stretched into the Parisian sky. The evening air was crisp, the city glowing beneath the fading light of the sun. Everything was set the moment, the place, the ring in his pocket, and the woman beside him. It had taken months of planning, countless hours researching the best possible way to propose, but this was the moment that would define the rest of his life. Lisa, his fiancée, stood beside him, her arm looped through his. She was as beautiful as always, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes sparkling with excitement. They had been together for 2 years, and every second with her had felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. They had shared everything: adventures, heartbreak, dreams of a future together. James had no doubt that she was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. "James," Lisa said, her voice a soft whisper in the cool evening air. It's perfect." James smiled, squeezing her hand. "I've always wanted to show you the world, Lisa. Paris felt like the best place to start." Lisa laughed, her eyes bright. "We've already been to Paris together, silly. But tonight, I think we've topped it." James laughed too, but in the back of his mind, the weight of what was about to happen, what he had been planning for months, loomed. He could feel the adrenaline rush through him as he slid his hand into his pocket, pulling out the ring that had been carefully chosen, a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations. He took a deep breath, and in that moment, as the crowd around them buzzed, everything else seemed to fade away. He turned to face her, dropping to one knee, his heart pounding. "Lisa," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the moment I met you, I knew that you were the one. You've made my life better in ways I never thought possible. I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Lisa's eyes as she stared down at him, a smile spreading across her face. Yes, of course I will," she exclaimed, pulling him into a tight embrace as the crowd around them cheered. The Eiffel Tower lit up behind them in a dazzling display of lights, casting a magical glow over the moment. It was everything he had hoped, for everything he had dreamed of. The woman of his dreams, the ring, the perfect setting his life, was falling into place. He had no doubt that this was the right choice. He was finally ready to take the next step. Weeks later, wedding plans began. After returning to New York, the whirlwind of wedding planning began. The initial excitement was overwhelming. Lisa was in her element, organizing every detail: flowers, venues, catering, the guest list. James had always been a planner, but seeing Lisa in her element made him feel like the luckiest man alive. They were a team, and everything felt so right. But there were small, fleeting moments that made James pause. The first time he noticed it was when Lisa seemed distant after returning from a work event. She had been gone all weekend, handling a major presentation for her marketing firm, but when she came back, she was more distracted than usual. She was always on her phone, texting quickly, and glancing over her shoulder when he asked her about her day. It was odd, but he dismissed it. She was busy. He had his own deadlines at work, and the wedding plans were taking up a lot of their time. But the unease started to build. Lisa became more secretive about her phone, especially at night, when they would usually unwind together. She was always busy with work, even on weekends, when they were supposed to be planning the wedding. And yet, when they had dinner together, she seemed to zone out, her mind elsewhere. James tried to push the feelings aside. He loved her. She loved him. They were getting married. It didn't make sense for him to doubt her, to question her motives. But that tiny seed of doubt had already been planted, and no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, it began to fester. A friend in need. One night, James confided in Matt, his best friend since college. Matt had always been his confidant, the guy he turned to when he was unsure about something, or just needed advice. They had been through everything together, from late-night study sessions to road trips across the country. They even shared an apartment for a year before James met Lisa. Matt was sitting across from him in a bar downtown, nursing a beer. James had never been one to open up about his relationship issues, but something about the changes in Lisa's behavior had begun to gnaw at him. "I don't know, man," James said, running a hand through his hair. "Lisa's been acting weird lately. She's always on her phone, always texting, always somewhere else. I don't know what to make of it." Matt frowned, his brow furrowing as he sipped his drink. "Sounds like she's just busy with work. You know how things get during the wedding planning stage." "I don't know, Matt. It's more than that. I've asked her, and she brushes it off, says it's nothing. But I don't know." Matt set his beer down and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Maybe you're overthinking it, dude. You know Lisa. She's not the type to cheat or lie to you. She's probably just stressed. You know, work, Wedding planning. You're both under a lot of pressure. James nodded, though the unease in his stomach remained. He trusted Matt, but something in his gut told him that he needed to dig deeper. The first red flag. It wasn't until one late evening that James's suspicions were confirmed in a way he never could have imagined. Lisa had been at a work dinner with a few colleagues from her firm, and James had decided to stay home that night to catch up on his own work. But as the evening wore on, and Lisa hadn't returned by the time he'd expected, something stirred inside him. He grabbed his phone and called her. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey babe, just checking in. Hope everything's okay," he said casually, though his voice betrayed the nervousness he felt. 30 minutes passed, then an hour, and still no word. It was nearly midnight when James's phone buzzed. It was a message from Matt. "Hey man, you good? I just saw something on social media. I think you need to see it." James frowned, typing back quickly. "What are you talking about?" The response came almost instantly. "I don't know how to explain this, but it's a picture of Lisa. She's with someone you might not expect. I'm sending it to you now." James's heart skipped a beat. He felt his palms grow clammy as he opened the link Matt sent him. The picture loaded slowly, and as it appeared on his screen, the world seemed to stop. It was Lisa sitting on a bar stool, laughing, her face inches away from Matt. He had to blink several times to process the image. They weren't just sitting next to each other. They were practically entwined. Lisa's hand rested on Matt's leg, her head tilted toward his as they exchanged a private laugh. It looked like they were more than friends, far more than just colleagues. The air in James's apartment felt thick, suffocating. He stared at the photo on his phone, the image of Lisa and Matt laughing together too close, too intimate. His heart pounded in his chest, the beats frantic and erratic as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. For a moment, he thought he might pass out. The reality of it seemed too much to bear. How could this have happened? How could Matt, his best friend, betray him like this? How could Lisa, the woman he was about to marry, be in a secret relationship with the one person he trusted most? James's hands shook as he dropped the phone onto the coffee table. He stood up and began pacing the room, the walls closing in on him. His mind raced, jumping from one thought to the next. The picture, the way Matt and Lisa looked at each other, the closeness, the trust he had given both of them. How had it all been so easily shattered? He thought back to all the moments he had spent with Lisa and Matt, all the years of friendship with Matt, the late-night talks, the road trips, the shared laughter. And with Lisa, everything they had built together, the trips they had taken, the plans they had made for their future. He had trusted them with everything. Why didn't I see it? He thought, his stomach churning. Why didn't I notice the signs? James grabbed his phone again, his fingers trembling as he opened the text from Matt. The message had only said, "I think you need to see it." He scrolled back to the image and zoomed in, focusing on the details. Lisa's smile. The way she was touching Matt's leg. The way Matt was looking at Harriet was unmistakable. This wasn't just a friendship. This was something else entirely. For the first time in months, James felt a deep anger rise within him. Not just toward Lisa or Matt, but toward himself. He had been blind. He had let himself be deceived by the image of the perfect relationship, the future he had planned, when everything around him had been falling apart. His trust had been a lie. His world had been a lie. No, I'm not going to let this slide. He needed to confront them, both of them. He couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine. He wasn't going to let them walk away from this without facing the consequences of their actions. But as much as he hated the thought, he knew he had to be calm. He had to approach this with control. He had to expose them. He wasn't going to let them destroy him and then act like nothing had happened. I'll show them the truth. Lisa's confession. The next day, James didn't sleep. He spent hours pacing the apartment, trying to calm his mind. It felt like every inch of him was vibrating with anger, betrayal, and sadness. Finally, by the afternoon, he couldn't put it off any longer. He called Lisa. Her voice, when she answered, was warm and familiar. She didn't know anything yet. She didn't know what he had seen. "Hey, babe, I was just thinking about you," she said. "Are you okay? You sounded off last night." James clenched his jaw. The words came out colder than he intended. "I need to talk to you. Now." There was a hesitation on the other end. Lisa was silent for a moment, as if considering something. "James, what's going on?" "I know about you and Matt," he said, cutting her off before she could say anything else. "I know what's been going on between you two. I saw the photo." Lisa gasped. "James, too. Don't know what you mean." He could hear the panic in her voice. He wasn't sure if she was trying to lie her way out or if she was genuinely shocked, but the words tumbled out anyway. The photo, you and Matt, laughing, touching too close. I know everything. You're not fooling me. There was a long, excruciating silence. For a moment, James thought she might hang up. He could almost hear her thoughts, her excuses, and the lies she was trying to put together. But then, Lisa spoke, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry, James, she said quietly. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But Matt and we've been seeing each other for the past few months. It just happened. James felt the floor drop out beneath him. He could hear his heart hammering in his chest, but his mind was almost too stunned to process the words. They've been seeing each other for months? He thought, struggling to breathe. You've been seeing Matt? My best friend? Behind my back? His voice cracked, the betrayal so deep that it felt like a wound in his soul. How could you do this to me? How could you lie to me? How could you look me in the eyes and pretend everything was fine? Lisa's voice faltered, as if she was searching for a way to make it all make sense. I never wanted to hurt you, James. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I know that doesn't make it okay. I know I've ruined everything. But please, try to understand. I don't know how to explain it. James wanted to scream. He wanted to throw the phone against the wall, to end the conversation right there. But instead, he let her continue, her words nothing but empty apologies. I didn't mean for any of this, Lisa repeated, her voice barely a whisper now. But I can't undo it. I can't change what's already happened. I don't even know who you are anymore, James said, his voice breaking. I thought you were the woman I was going to marry. I thought you were the person I could trust. But I was wrong. You've betrayed me in the worst possible way. Lisa sobbed on the other end of the line. James, please. I love you. I always have. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't want to lose you. But James couldn't hear her. He couldn't feel her love through the phone. The image of her with Matt haunted him, a picture of intimacy and deceit. You've already lost me, he whispered. You and Matt, you're both dead to me. Matt's turn. When James ended the call, he didn't feel relief. He didn't feel closure. He only felt the hollow weight of betrayal, a feeling that had consumed him and left nothing but anger in its wake. He needed to confront Matt next. It wasn't enough that he had exposed Lisa. He needed to know why Matt had done this. Why his best friend, the man he had trusted with everything, had turned his back on him. Matt answered quickly, and there was a calmness in his voice, as if he knew this conversation was coming. James, I've been waiting for you to call. Don't act like this is something I should have expected, James said, his voice hard and unforgiving. I saw the photos, Matt, you and Lisa. Don't try to deny it. I know the truth. Matt sighed deeply on the other end, and for the first time, his voice seemed small, regretful. I never wanted it to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you, man. You're my best friend. But, Lisa and Ewell, it just happened. It just happened? James shot back, incredulous. What, did you both just wake up one day and think, hey, let's ruin James's life today? I didn't think it would get this far, Matt said, his voice almost pleading. I didn't mean for it to happen. It wasn't intentional. But I can't deny what's happened between us. I'm sorry, James. I really am. The sincerity in Matt's voice was almost unbearable. James clenched his fists, the anger rising again. I don't want your apology, Matt. I don't want anything from you. You've destroyed everything, my trust, my friendship, and now my relationship. You've ruined my life, and there's nothing you can say to fix it. James, please, don't do this. We can work through this together. Matt tried again, but James was done. I'm done with you, James said, his voice cold and final. I'm done with both of you. And with that, he hung up. The sound of the line going dead was the final nail in the coffin. His world had just imploded, and there was no going back. But there was one thing James knew for sure. He wasn't going to let them get away with this. He would make them face the consequences. The days that followed James's confrontations with Lisa and Matt felt like a blur of anger, confusion, and disbelief. His emotions fluctuated wildly. Some moments he felt consumed by a cold, burning rage. Other times there was only a quiet emptiness, a hollow space where the life he had planned with Lisa once existed. But no matter how many times his mind replayed the conversations, no matter how many times he looked at the images of Lisa and Matt together, James knew one thing for sure. He could never go back to the life he had before. The life where he had trusted them both. The life where everything seemed so simple and perfect. That life was gone, irrevocably shattered, and the future he had envisioned for himself was now a foggy, distant memory. Yet in the midst of the pain, something else had taken root: the need for control. James wasn't going to sit idly by, letting the world continue on while his life lay in ruins. He wasn't going to let them walk away from this unscathed. He needed to make them feel the weight of their actions. The question was, how? The plan. James didn't sleep much that night. He spent hours thinking through every possible scenario, every possible consequence. His mind raced with ideas, each one more elaborate than the last. But one thing kept coming back to him: public exposure. It was the only way that felt right. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public. Matt had been more than just a best friend. He had been family. And Lisa, his fiancée, the woman he had planned to marry, had shattered him in the most intimate way possible. They deserved to be exposed. They needed to feel the weight of what they had done to him, to his future. James knew he had to act fast. He had already canceled the wedding venue, and his family and friends were aware of the situation. But what about the guests who had already RSVP'd? What about the people who had followed them on social media? The people who had witnessed their love story unfold in front of their eyes? The answer was simple. He would ruin the wedding in the most public way possible. But it wouldn't just be about the wedding anymore. James had been betrayed by two of the most important people in his life, and they were going to know exactly what it felt like to be publicly humiliated. The invitation. The next day, James began to put his plan into motion. He reached out to the wedding venue and rebooked the space not for a ceremony, but for a special event. He crafted a message that would be sent out to all the wedding guests, one that would draw them into his trap. Dear friends and family, I want to invite you to a special event to commemorate the wedding that was supposed to take place. While it may not be the wedding you expected, it is a moment I feel is necessary to share with all of you. Please join me at venue name, on date and time, for what will surely be a memorable evening. Best, James. He had the invitations printed and mailed out within a few hours. Then, he set about creating a digital invitation note that would go out on social media. He wasn't just going to expose them to the guests. He was going to expose them to the world. The photo he had seen of Lisa and Matt laughing together would be included as part of the invite, and James made sure to write a caption that would capture the full extent of the betrayal. Sometimes the truth is harder to swallow than a fairy tale. Join me as I share a story you won't believe. Number truth, number betrayal, number exposed. James posted it to Facebook, Instagram, and even Twitter, making sure every tag, every hashtag, was in place to maximize the reach. The photo was up, the caption was set, and all he had to do now was wait. The night before the event, James sat in his apartment, the weight of what he was about to do settling over him like a blanket of cold. He had spent the day double-checking every detail, making sure everything was in place. The photos were uploaded, the venue was ready. The guests were about to get the shock of their lives. But despite all the preparation, despite knowing that this was his only chance for closure, James couldn't shake the knot in his stomach. Was he doing the right thing? Was this revenge? Or was it justice? Could he really live with what he was about to do? He thought about the years he had spent with Lisa, the way they had talked about their future, the vacations they had planned, the love they had shared. All of that seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the harsh reality of betrayal. He thought about Mathis' best friend, his brother, the one person he had trusted above all others, and how he had slept with Lisa behind his back. His best friend, who had known everything about his relationship, everything about his love for Lisa, had still done this. James didn't know how he would ever look either of them in the eye again. He didn't know how to forgive them, or even if he ever would. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, and finally, he made his decision. He wasn't doing this out of hate. He was doing it out of necessity. He needed to take back control of his life. He couldn't keep being the victim. He wasn't going to let them walk away from this unscathed. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would feel the consequences of their actions. The event. James arrived at the venue early, his heart pounding in his chest. The evening had arrived, the night he had been planning for weeks, the night that would expose everything. The guests began to trickle in. His family, some of his close friends, a few acquaintances from work. They all seemed to have no idea what was coming, chatting among themselves, some excited, some confused about the nature of the event. Lisa and Matt had been invited too, but neither of them had responded to the invitation. James knew they were probably dreading this moment, but there was no turning back now. The room was set. The long tables were adorned with flowers. The lighting was soft, and the space had been transformed, for what had once been a celebration of love. But now, it felt like a stage for something darker, something more real. At 7 p.m., the final guests arrived. Everyone was seated. The chatter died down as James stood up and walked to the front of the room, a microphone in his hand. His heart raced, but his face was calm. He had rehearsed his words over and over in his head, and now, standing there, he felt nothing but a cold resolve. "Good evening, everyone," James said, his voice carrying across the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I know you were expecting a wedding, but tonight, I'm here to share a different kind of story one. I wish I didn't have to tell." The room fell silent. All eyes were on him, waiting for what came next. James took a deep breath, then continued. "This is the story of how two of the people I loved most in this world, the woman I thought I would marry, and my best friend betrayed me in the worst way possible." He paused, letting the words settle before he pressed play on the projector behind him. The screen flickered, and the photo of Lisa and Matt laughing together appeared, filling the room. James's voice didn't waver as he spoke. "This is what happened behind my back. This is the truth, and now everyone here will know." Gasps filled the room. Lisa and Matt, who had been standing in the back, tried to move toward him, but James held up his hand, silencing them. He wasn't done yet. The room was silent. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic outside the venue, and the soft clinking of silverware, which felt like an echo in the vast emptiness of the moment. Every pair of eyes was fixed on James, and every single person in the room was trying to comprehend what they had just seen. The picture of Lisa and Matt, their faces too close, their smiles too intimate, was still projected on the screen behind him, like a lingering accusation. 100 eyes were on him, but his focus remained on them. Matt and Lisa, standing frozen at the back of the room, their faces pale, their bodies stiff with shock and fear. Lisa's hand trembled as she reached for Matt's arm, but Matt didn't move. He stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at James with wide eyes, guilt radiating off him in waves. Lisa looked like she might collapse, her mouth opening and closing as though she wanted to speak but had no words to form. James didn't take his eyes off them. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his heartbeat still thundering in his chest. But there was a strange sense of satisfaction. The plan had worked. The truth was out there for everyone to see. And now, they would face the consequences of their actions. He raised the microphone to his lips and spoke, his voice steady, almost cold. "This is the reality of what happened while I was planning a life with Lisa. What you see on that screen is not a one-time mistake. It's months of deception, betrayal, and lies." The gasps from the guests around him were almost drowned out by the weight of his words. The truth hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and it seemed to settle over everyone in the room like a shroud. "I trusted both of them," James continued, his voice cutting through the silence. "I gave them my trust, my heart, and my future, and they betrayed me." Lisa, her face now streaked with tears, took a hesitant step forward. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was small, almost pleading. "James, please. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. James cut her off, his voice sharp. "Save it, Lisa. You had plenty of chances to come clean, to tell me the truth, but you chose to lie. You chose him over me. And now, I'm done." Matt took a step forward, his hands raised, trying to diffuse the tension, but James wasn't having it. "Don't you dare speak, Matt," he said coldly. "You've already spoken with your actions. Your apology means nothing." The room was still, the guests unsure of what to do, some standing awkwardly, others looking at each other in disbelief. James could feel the weight of the judgment on him, but it didn't matter. He had taken control of the situation, and now, it was time to finish what he had started. "You've both humiliated me in front of everyone I know," James said, his voice louder now. "You think I'm just supposed to forgive you? Move on and pretend like this never happened?" Lisa took a step back, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. But James couldn't feel sympathy for her anymore, not after everything she had done. "I'm done," he said firmly. "I'm done with you, Lisa. I'm done with you, Matt. You've taken enough from me. You don't deserve my forgiveness." There was a long pause. Then, slowly, the guests began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, murmuring among themselves. Some of them cast uneasy glances at Lisa and Matt. Some avoided looking at James altogether, but he didn't care. He had made his point. Lisa's sobs were growing louder now, and Matt, his face pale and sweating, finally broke his silence. "James, please," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." "Too late," James replied, his voice hard. "You've already hurt me, Matt, and I don't think there's anything you can say to fix that." There was nothing more to say. No amount of apologies, no grand gestures could undo the damage they had done. For the first time in his life, James felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Themet. It was about reclaiming his life, about moving on, about letting go of the past that had held him hostage for so long. "Everyone," James said, turning to address the guests. "I know you didn't sign up for this. This wasn't the event we had planned, but I felt you all needed to hear the truth. This is the end of a chapter in my life, and now I'm moving on." Without waiting for a response, he dropped the microphone and walked out of the room. His heart was pounding, his hands shaking, but the sense of liberation was undeniable. For the first time in weeks, he felt free. He had taken back control. The aftermath. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, messages, and emails. News of the wedding scandal spread faster than he could have ever imagined. His phone buzzed nonstop, from friends asking if he was okay, to colleagues offering support, but it was mostly filled with the same question. Why? Why had he done it? Why had he exposed them like that? But there was no answer he needed to give. James knew the world would never truly understand why he did it. Some would call it revenge. Others would call it justice. He wasn't interested in labels. What mattered was that he had taken control, and he had no intention of looking back. Lisa and Matt both tried to contact him, but James ignored their calls. He didn't need to speak with them anymore. He didn't need their apologies. What they had taken from him was irreplaceable, but now he had his own path to forge. The person he had once been was gone, but the person he was becoming was just beginning to take shape. He wasn't the broken man who had stood at the altar, betrayed by the people he loved. He was someone stronger now, rebuilding. A week later, James took his first step toward moving forward. He went to the gym for the first time in months, pushing himself through a brutal workout. Sweat drenched his clothes, his muscles aching from the effort, but it felt good. It felt like he was doing something for himself, for the first time in a long time. Afterward, he sat in the gym's locker room, catching his breath and reflecting on everything that had happened. His body felt lighter, but his mind was still weighed down with the aftermath of everything that had gone down. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but this was his life now. There was no going back, but there was a future ahead. And this time, it was his future. James left the gym, walking out into the cold night air. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. And that was the first step to moving on. The days after the event at the venue felt like a blur of conflicting emotions. On one hand, James had felt empowered, a sense of justice settling over him after exposing Lisa and Matt's betrayal to the world. On the other hand, the aftermath was a flood of loneliness, anger, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The anger he'd felt in the moment had softened into something deeper grief. Grief for the life he had lost, for the woman he thought he would marry, and for the friend he thought he knew better than anyone. For the first few days, James stayed in his apartment, refusing to leave except for the occasional trip to the gym. The silence was deafening. The city outside his window continued on, as it always did, oblivious to his turmoil. It was as if the world didn't care that his heart had been broken into a million pieces. Yet somehow, he had to keep moving forward. The wreckage of his past was too fresh to ignore, but his future was still there, somewhere, waiting for him to rediscover it. The first step, therapy. A week after the public exposure, James's mother called. She had been the steady presence in his life since his father passed away when he was younger. She'd been the one who taught him how to trust, how to love, and how to forgive. When she heard what had happened, she was devastated for him, but also worried about how he was coping. "James, I know you're angry," she said gently on the phone, "but you can't carry all of this on your own. You need to talk to someone. Please, for me, just go see someone, a therapist. I think it'll help." James hesitated at first. Therapy had always seemed like something other people needed, not him. He wasn't sure what a therapist could tell him that he didn't already know. He had always prided himself on being able to handle everything himself. But after a long silence on the phone with his mother, he realized she was right. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. If he wanted to move forward, he needed help. That afternoon, he called a therapist his mother had recommended, and after a brief consultation, he scheduled his first appointment. The first session was awkward. James had never been the type to open up easily. He sat in the small office, feeling stiff in the leather chair, glancing around at the framed art on the walls and the small bookshelf lined with self-help books. It felt like an invasion of his privacy, like someone was about to analyze every part of his life. His therapist, Dr. Larson, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. She didn't push him to speak, but her presence was calming, and for the first time in weeks, James felt like maybe he could be understood. "So, James," Dr. Larson began, "I know it's hard to walk into a therapy session, especially after everything you've been through, but you've already taken the first step, and that's huge. Now, we can take it one step at a time, at your pace." James exhaled sharply, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. He didn't know where to start. I don't even know what to say. Everything feels like it's falling apart. Lisa, Matt, everything. I trusted them. And now, everything is ruined. I feel so angry, but I don't even know what to do with it." Dr. Larson nodded, her gaze understanding. "That's completely normal. Anger is a natural response to betrayal. But it's important to understand that holding on to that anger indefinitely can be harmful to you. You have to find a way to process it, to let go, so that it doesn't consume you." James shifted uncomfortably. "I'm trying, but every time I think about what they did, I just feel like I'm stuck. I can't stop thinking about it." "You're in pain, James," she said gently, "and that pain is valid. It's going to take time to heal, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you work through it." James swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. For the first time in a while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be as easy as just getting over it. Maybe he wouldn't wake up tomorrow and magically feel better. But he could start. He could begin to heal. The small victories. Over the next few weeks, James attended regular therapy sessions. It wasn't easy. He fought the urge to shut down, to keep his emotions buried where they couldn't hurt him. But little by little, he started to open up. He talked about his childhood, about growing up without his father, about his mother's strength in raising him. He talked about his relationship with Lisa, how he had always thought she was the one, and how the betrayal had shaken him to his core. Each session left him feeling drained, but also lighter, as if a weight had been lifted, even if just a little bit. In between therapy, he focused on himself. He took time to reconnect with old friends, and he even began to pick up hobbies he had put on the back burner. He took cooking classes, something he had always wanted to do but had never had the time for. He spent more time in nature, going on long walks through Central Park, trying to clear his mind. He even started reading again, something that had once been a passion but had fallen away during the chaos of his life with Lisa. The moment of realization. It wasn't until one evening, a month after everything had unraveled, that James realized how far he had come. He was sitting on his balcony, a glass of wine in hand, looking out over the skyline of New York City. The lights were twinkling in the distance, and the hustle and bustle of the city seemed like a world away. He wasn't completely healed, he knew that. But he felt different, lighter, stronger. He had come to terms with the betrayal, and though the anger still lingered, it no longer consumed him. He had started to see the truth of the situation. Lisa and Matt had hurt him, but they didn't have the power to destroy him. James had been living in the shadow of their actions for so long, but now, as he sat on the balcony, he realized he was finally free. He wasn't tied to the past anymore. He wasn't the same person who had stood at that altar, hopeful and naive. He had grown, and though the scars would always be there, they didn't define him. He could move forward. He could create a new future for himself. A new beginning. The next day, James made a call to his mother. "I'm ready, Mom," he said. "I think it's time for me to move on. I'm not sure what's next, but I'm ready to find out." She was silent for a moment before answering. "I'm so proud of you, James. You've come a long way. I knew you would find your way back to happiness." For the first time in months, James felt a wave of peace settle over him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt excited about it. He had survived the hardest part, and now it was time for him to rebuild his life. He wasn't sure what that future looked like, but he knew one thing. It would be his. And that, he realized, was enough. The days following James's decision to move on were filled with quiet moments of reflection, and the small, deliberate steps that came with rebuilding his life. It wasn't a process that happened overnight, had known that all along. But what he hadn't expected was how much of himself he had left to rediscover. His life, once defined by the love he thought would last forever, had been abruptly altered. But in the days and weeks that followed, he began to realize that maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to define a new version of himself. A new routine. James had spent weeks focusing inward, healing in ways he had never thought possible. But now, With the old life behind him, he had to start moving forward. It wasn't just about putting the pieces of his heart back together. It was about rebuilding everything else around him. His apartment, once filled with reminders of Lisa, was no longer a place of comfort. It had become a cage, a prison of memories. So, he started small. He cleaned out his apartment, tossing things that no longer served him. Items from trips with Lisa, photos of the two of them together, thing that had once seemed sacred now felt like a burden. As he packed boxes, he found a sense of release, like he was peeling away the layers of pain, one box at a time. James even started redecorating, replacing the furniture that had been part of his life with Lisa. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about making space for something new. And little by little, the apartment began to look like his space again, rather than a reminder of the life he had lost. Work and purpose. The next thing he focused on was his work. At first, James had thrown himself into his job, hoping to keep his mind distracted. But after the fallout with Lisa and Matt, he had found himself mentally checked out. His heart hadn't been in it, and it showed. Projects were delayed, deadlines were missed, and his energy was low. But now, as he started to rebuild his personal life, he found himself regaining focus at work. He was no longer weighed down by the betrayal. He was pushing himself to perform at the level he knew he could. His manager noticed the change. One afternoon, she called him into her office. "James, I've seen a shift in your attitude lately. Your performance is back to where it should be, and I wanted to let you know that your hard work hasn't gone unnoticed." James smiled, grateful for the recognition. "Thanks, Sarah. It means a lot to hear that. There's a new project coming up," she said. "It's going to be a big one, and I want you to lead it." James blinked in surprise. "Lead it?" "Yes," she said, her tone firm but encouraging. "I know you've had a lot on your plate, but you're one of the most qualified people for this. It's a great opportunity for you. I believe in you." It was a moment of clarity for James. A new project wasn't just about career advancement, it was a chance for him to prove to himself that he could handle things on his own. It was an opportunity to move forward, to stop letting his past define his future. He accepted the challenge without hesitation. Reaching out. As James began to feel more grounded, he started reconnecting with old friends, people he had neglected over the past few months, while his relationship with Lisa took priority. It felt good to reconnect with them, to laugh again, and to remember what it was like to have fun without the constant weight of betrayal hanging over him. One evening, he met up with a group of friends at a bar. They were all their old college buddies, people he hadn't seen in a while. James felt a sense of belonging again, a reminder that there was more to life than the pain he had been through. "James, you're looking good, man," said Chris, a friend from college, who had always been the life of the party. "It's good to see you back to your old self." James smiled. "Thanks, Chris. It's been a rough few months, but I'm getting there." "You're stronger than you think," Chris said, clapping him on the back. "We're all here for you, man. You've got this." For the first time in a long time, James felt like he wasn't alone. He had friends who cared about him, people who had been with him through the good times and the bad. They reminded him that life could go on, that it was possible to rebuild, even after everything had fallen apart. The unlikely connection. A month later, James attended a networking event for work. It was the kind of event he usually dreaded, crowded, loud, filled with people who were only interested in climbing the corporate ladder. But this time, something was different. He wasn't attending the event to distract himself or to forget about his past. He was there because he had a purpose. He was starting to rebuild a career that had been temporarily sidelined, and he was going to do it on his own terms. At the event, he found himself talking to a woman named Emily, a marketing director at a tech company. She was smart, engaging, and had a dry sense of humor that put him at ease. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before long, they found themselves talking about more than just work. They talked about life, about challenges, and about how difficult it could be to trust people after betrayal. "I had a tough time trusting people after a bad breakup," Emily confessed. "It's hard to believe in someone again when they've hurt you." James nodded, feeling an unexpected connection with her. "I know exactly what you mean. Trust is so important, and when it's broken, it feels like you'll never get it back. But you will," she said, her smile reassuring. "It just takes time, and you have to learn to trust yourself first." There was something about her words that resonated with James. He wasn't ready to start dating again, not yet, but talking to Emily felt different. It wasn't about moving on from Lisa. It wasn't about replacing her. It was about finding a sense of connection again. It was about remembering that he could trust again, that he was worthy of that trust. They exchanged numbers before the evening ended, and as James walked home, A small part of him wondered if maybe, just maybe, the future wasn't as bleak as he had once thought. Facing the past. A final conversation. A week later, James received a message from his mother. She wanted him to meet for coffee. As he sat down across from her in a quiet cafe, he noticed the concern in her eyes. She had always been his rock, the one person he could rely on no matter what. "James," she began gently, "I know you've been through so much, but I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for you." James looked at her, puzzled. "Forgiveness? Mom, I don't think I can forgive Lisa and Matt. What they did was unforgivable." "I'm not saying you have to forgive them now," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But one day, you might find peace by forgiving them not because they deserve it, but because you deserve it. Holding on to the anger, the bitterness, it doesn't hurt them. It hurts you." James sat in silence, taking in her words. He had never thought about it that way. He had been holding on to his anger, his sense of injustice, but in doing so, he had been holding himself back. Forgiving them didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean he had to let them back into his life, but maybe it meant he could finally let go of the weight they had placed on him. "I'm not ready for that," James said quietly, "but I'll think about it." His mother smiled, her eyes filled with love. "That's all I'm asking." The weight of James's mother's words lingered long after their conversation. He found himself thinking about them during quiet moments when he wasn't busy with work or pushing himself to forget the pain. He didn't want to forgive Lisa and Matt, not yet. He wasn't even sure if he ever would. But his mother had made him realize something important. Forgiveness wasn't about them, it was about him. It was about freeing himself from the heavy burden of anger that had been weighing him down. The shift. A few days after his conversation with his mother, James went for a long walk through Central Park. The weather had turned crisp, and the autumn leaves painted the city in shades of gold and red. It was a beautiful scene, but his mind was heavy with thoughts of forgiveness, or, more accurately, his lack of it. He had always prided himself on being able to control his emotions, on keeping his composure, no matter the situation. But for the past few months, everything had been out of his control. His relationship, his best friend's betrayal, the public humiliation. None of it had been his choice. And now, this new concept of forgiveness felt foreign, something he wasn't ready for. But as he walked through the park, the cool breeze brushing against his face, James couldn't help but feel a sense of peace in the air. The world, it seemed, was still turning. And maybe that was the lesson he needed to learn. He sat down on a bench near a small pond, watching the ducks glide across the water. The rustling of the leaves and the soft chirps of birds were calming. And for the first time in a long while, James allowed himself to simply be. No expectations, no plans, just the present moment. He let out a long breath, closing his eyes. Forgiveness. It wasn't something he needed to force, but he could try to work on letting go of the anger, little by little. It didn't mean he was letting Lisa or Matt off the hook. It didn't mean he was going to welcome them back into his life, but it meant he could stop carrying the weight of their betrayal, the burden that had been keeping him stuck. As James sat there, he realized something. The world had been moving on without him, but he didn't have to remain tethered to the past. He had every right to move forward, and he was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to do that. A new friendship. One thing that had kept James grounded in the past few months was his new friendship with Emily. They had met at the networking event, and their conversations since then had become a bright spot in his life. Emily wasn't pushy, and she wasn't trying to fill the space left by Lisa. She was simply someone who was there, someone who could relate to the challenges of moving forward after betrayal. They started spending more time together, getting to know each other outside of work and casual networking events. It wasn't about romantic interest. James wasn't ready for that yet, but Emily had become someone he could talk to. She didn't ask questions about his past unless he offered, and when he did, she listened without judgment. One Saturday, a few weeks after their first meeting, Emily suggested they go for a hike together. It wasn't the type of thing James would normally have done. He wasn't exactly outdoorsy, but it felt right to do something spontaneous, something outside of his usual routine. They drove out of the city and into the mountains, where the air was crisp and the trees seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The hike was challenging, but the physical exertion was freeing. It allowed James to focus on something other than his thoughts for a while, on the simple pleasure of being in nature, of feeling the sweat on his skin, of pushing himself to keep going. By the time they reached the top of the trail, James was winded but exhilarated. They sat down on a large rock, overlooking the vast expanse of the mountains and the valley below. "This is amazing," James said, his breath still coming in heavy gasps. I never would have thought to do something like this before. Emily smiled. I think it's good for both of us. We've both had a lot on our minds, and sometimes the best way to reset is to get out of our heads and into the world around us. James nodded, looking out over the landscape. The sense of peace he felt in that moment was unexpected. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion that had brought him peace, it was the realization that he was no longer trapped in his own bitterness. For the first time in a while, he felt a sense of freedom. Not freedom from Lisa and Matt. Not yet, but freedom from the emotional chains that had held him down. He was finally starting to feel like himself again, like the person he had been before everything fell apart. Small steps, big changes. As the weeks passed, James's life began to slowly but steadily take on new rhythms. He found himself enjoying the things that had once been his passions, but had been forgotten in the wake of his heartbreak. He played guitar again, something he hadn't done in months. He spent time with his friends, laughing over drinks at the local bar. He even started cooking meals for himself, a simple act that felt more fulfilling than he ever expected. He and Emily began meeting more often, and while their conversations were easy and casual, James couldn't deny that there was something comforting about having someone in his life who chose to be there. She wasn't a reminder of his past. She wasn't someone he had to look at and remember all the ways he had been hurt. She was a new friend, someone who saw him for who he was now, not who he had been. Still, James was cautious. The pain of his past had taught him to guard his heart, to keep his emotions in check. He wasn't ready to jump into anything new. But as he spent more time with Emily, he began to see that maybe there was space for more in his life space. For trust, for companionship, and yes, even for love. But that was a thought for another day. For now, he focused on the small victories in healing, on reconnecting with himself, and on enjoying the simple pleasures of life that he had taken for granted before. A new beginning, a conversation with Matt. As much as James had moved forward in his own way, he knew there were still pieces of the past he had to face, and that included Matt. It had been a few months since the public exposure of the betrayal, but James had still not spoken to Matt. There was too much anger, too much hurt to even think about a conversation. But one afternoon, his phone rang. It was Matt. James stared at the phone for a long time, his finger hovering over the screen. Part of him wanted to ignore the call, to let it go straight to voicemail. But another part of him knew that he couldn't keep avoiding this forever. He needed to hear what Matt had to say. He answered. James. Matt's voice was tentative, almost apologetic. I don't know where to start. I know I've ruined everything. But I'm calling because I want to make amends. I can't undo what I did, but I need to try. James felt the anger well up inside him, but he held it in check. This was his moment, not Matt's. Matt, you betrayed me. You lied to me. And you hurt me in a way I'll never forget. I know, Matt said quietly. And I'm sorry. I was selfish. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I regret it more than anything. I'll regret it for the rest of my life. James took a deep breath, his mind a swirl of emotions. He wasn't ready to forgive Matt. Not yet. But hearing his friend's sincere apology stirred something inside him. Maybe he could start to let go of the anger, piece by piece. Maybe he could find a way to heal. I'm not ready to forgive you, Matt, James said, his voice steady. And I don't know if I ever will be, but I appreciate you calling. I need time. Matt was quiet for a moment before speaking again. I understand, James, and I'll wait. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. James hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation settling over him. He wasn't ready to forgive, but he was closer than he had been before. Forgiveness, after all, wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a journey. And James was finally beginning to realize that he had the power to choose his path. The months following his conversation with Matt were a turning point in James's journey. Each day brought him closer to a life he was beginning to accept, even though it wasn't the life he had planned. His old world, the one where Lisa and Matt had been his trusted confidants, was no longer his reality. But the new world he was slowly carving for himself was beginning to feel more authentic, even if it still felt foreign at times. James had no illusions that the road ahead would be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments where the past threatened to creep back in. But for the first time in a long time, he was learning to live without the weight of betrayal hanging over him. The new normal. One evening, as James sat at his apartment with a glass of wine, he thought about how far he had come. It wasn't just about letting go of the anger or moving past the hurt, it was about finding something new. He had learned to focus on the little things. The way the sun set over the skyline of New York, painting the buildings in soft shades of pink and orange. The small victories at work, the projects he had led with growing confidence, the quiet, peaceful moments of solitude where he could just be. But what struck him the most was how different he felt when he thought about his future. He wasn't constantly thinking about what Lisa and Matt had done to him anymore. It still hurt, but the sting wasn't as sharp. James had realized that he was allowed to move on, not just from them, but from the version of himself that had been defined by his pain. He had spent so long letting his heartbreak dictate his actions. But now, it was his turn to define himself, to reclaim his life on his own terms. A new direction. As the weeks passed, James began to step back into the world in a more meaningful way. His work was flourishing, his professional reputation steadily growing. The new project he had taken on had been a success, and his colleagues were beginning to recognize him as more than just a team member. One afternoon, while at lunch with his manager, Sarah, she mentioned a new opportunity that had opened up in the company. "James, you've been doing exceptional work lately. I've been talking with the higher-ups, and there's an opening for a senior position team leader for the analytics department. You're more than qualified for it, and I'd love to see you step into that role. It would be a big change, but I think you're ready for it." James paused, the weight of the offer sinking in. It was a big steepone that would require not just technical skills but also leadership and a new level of responsibility. But he felt a strange sense of readiness creeping into his chest. For so long he had been hesitant, uncertain, letting fear of failure hold him back. But now, after everything he had been through, he was starting to realize that he wasn't afraid anymore. "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "I knew you'd say yes. You've got this, James. I've seen how you've handled everything, and I know you can handle this too." The idea of stepping into a leadership role wasn't just about career advancement. It was about proving to himself that he could thrive again. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living again, moving forward, building something new from the ground up. The future of friendship. The phone call from Matt a few weeks earlier had left James in a place of uncertainty. He wasn't ready to forgive Matt yet, but he had started to consider the possibility of one day rebuilding their friendship. He didn't know when or if that would happen, but he wasn't closing the door completely. One evening, as James sat at his desk, his phone buzzed with a message. He glanced down, expecting it to be a work-related update, but when he saw the name on the screen, his stomach tightened. It was Matt. "Hey, James. I know things are still tough between us, but I wanted to say that I respect where you're at. I'm working on myself too. Whenever you're ready, I'm here. I hope one day we can talk about it all. Take care, man." James stared at the message for a long time. There was sincerity in Matt's words, but it didn't make the betrayal go away. He wasn't ready to let Matt back into his life yet, but he appreciated the maturity in the message. For now, James decided to leave it at that. He wasn't ready to forgive, but maybe, just maybe, he could find peace with it all. He didn't have to hold on to the anger forever. But that was a decision for another time. Moving forward with Emily. Over the past few months, Emily had become a source of calm in James's life. They had started spending more time together, their connection growing beyond just friendship. She was patient, never pushing James for more than he was ready to give, but always there when he needed someone to talk to. One evening, after a long day at work, Emily invited him to dinner. It was a small, cozy restaurant in the heart of the city. Nothing too extravagant, but perfect for the quiet evening they had ahead of them. As they sat across from each other, the conversation flowed easily, and James found himself feeling more and more at ease. He had grown so used to being alone, to carrying the weight of the past on his own. But with Emily, there was something different. She didn't expect him to be perfect, didn't ask him to be someone he wasn't. She just accepted him as he was, and that was more comforting than he could have imagined. "You've come so far, James," Emily said, her voice soft, but with a sense of admiration. "I've seen it in the way you carry yourself now. You're not the same person you were a few months ago. You've really found a way to move on." James looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm getting there. I think I'm starting to believe that I can have a future again." Emily's eyes softened, her gaze full of understanding. "You deserve that. You deserve a future filled with happiness and peace." James didn't know what the future held for him, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The past had been painful, but it didn't have to define him forever. He could shape his future, piece by piece, without carrying the burden of the past. A step forward. A few days later, James found himself in a small cafe, sitting across from his mother. They had met for a quick lunch, but as usual, their conversation drifted into deeper territory. "You're doing so much better, James," his mother said, her voice filled with pride. "I can see the change in you. You've worked so hard to rebuild your life, and I couldn't be more proud of you." James smiled, grateful for her words. "Thanks, Mom. It hasn't been easy, but I think I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. You know, I never once doubted you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "You're strong, James. Stronger than you realize." In that moment, James realized something important. He wasn't the same person who had been devastated by betrayal. He wasn't the same person who had been consumed by anger and heartbreak. He was becoming someone new, someone who had the strength to move forward and build a better life for himself. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that hinted at the arrival of winter. James stood by the window in his apartment, looking out at the city below. The skyline was bathed in golden light as the sun began to set, the streets bustling with the usual rhythm of New York, an endless wave of people moving, living, and thriving in their own little corners of the world. For the first time in months, James felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the peace that came from forgetting the past or pushing the pain away. It was a deeper peace, one that came from accepting that the past would always be a part of him, but it didn't have to define his future. He had made peace with the people who had hurt him. Lisa and Matt no longer consumed his thoughts, and while their betrayal still stung, James had learned to live with it, to allow himself the space to heal. He had faced the darkness, and now he was starting to step back into the light. A new chapter at work. As the days passed, James threw himself into his new role at work. The senior position Sarah had offered him had proven to be the challenge he needed. He had always been good at his job, but now, leading a team and managing projects was giving him a sense of purpose that he hadn't realized he was missing. He had spent the last few months focusing on healing emotionally, but now he was realizing that his professional life could be part of that healing too. Leading his team brought a new sense of fulfillment. James was learning what it meant to be a leader not just in the workplace but in life. His decision to step up wasn't just about career advancement. It was about reclaiming his autonomy, his ability to lead and inspire others, just as he was slowly learning to lead his own life again. On one particular morning, James found himself in a meeting with his team, presenting a new strategy for an upcoming project. As he spoke, he could feel the growing confidence in his voice. His colleagues were engaged, nodding along, and for the first time, he didn't second-guess himself. He didn't feel like the same man who had stood in front of his colleagues months ago, unsure of his place, weighed down by past hurts. He felt like someone who belonged, someone who had earned his spot at the table. After the meeting, Sarah approached him with a smile. "James, I have to say your presentation today was exactly what the team needed. You've really stepped up." James smiled back, feeling the warmth of her words. "Thanks, Sarah. It feels good to be back in the game. I've realized that focusing on work has been part of my recovery. It's something I can control, something that challenges me in the right ways." "Good," she said, her tone warm. "Keep it up. I'm proud of you." Her words meant more than she probably realized. It wasn't just a professional compliment. It was a recognition of his growth, of how far he had come from the man who was drowning in heartbreak and anger just a few months ago. The past and present collide. One afternoon, as James was reviewing some documents at his desk, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Hey James, it's Emily. I was thinking about you and wanted to check in. Hope everything's going well." James smiled. He hadn't expected to hear from Emily, but the thought of her was comforting. Their friendship had grown over the past few months, and while he wasn't rushing into anything romantic, he valued the connection they shared. She was someone he could talk to without fear of judgment, someone who had no history with the person he used to be, someone who simply accepted him for who he was now. He typed a quick reply. "Hey Emily, things are going well. Thanks for checking in. Work's been busy, but good. How about you?" Her response came quickly. "Same here. Busy, but good. We should grab coffee soon. Maybe this weekend?" James thought about it for a moment. He had been slowly stepping back into the dating world, not with any specific intentions, but more as a way to reconnect with life. It wasn't just about filling the void that had once been occupied by Lisa, it was about finding new connections, new possibilities. "That sounds good. Let's do it." The healing conversation. That Saturday afternoon, James met Emily at a local cafe they both liked. The place was cozy, with soft jazz playing in the background and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. It was a small, intimate setting, and James felt at ease the moment he walked in. Emily was already there, sitting at a table by the window, sipping her coffee. She waved when she saw him, her smile warm and inviting. "Hey you," she said as he sat down. "How've you been?" "I've been good," James replied. Busy, but in a good way. You? Same here. Work's been crazy, but it feels like things are finally settling down. It's nice to catch my breath. They talked for a while about work and the usual day-to-day stuff. But as they sipped their drinks and the conversation shifted to more personal topics, James found himself feeling a quiet sense of peace. Emily didn't ask him about his past or push him to share anything he wasn't ready to discuss. She just listened, and that was all he needed. After a few moments of silence, Emily looked at him thoughtfully. James, I know we've talked about a lot of things, but I just want you to know that I really admire how you've handled everything. You've been through so much, but you're still standing. You're stronger than you think. James smiled, a small, genuine smile that he hadn't felt in a long time. Thanks, Emily. That means a lot. I don't know if I always feel strong, but I'm trying. I'm learning how to let go of the past and trust that the future will be different. It will be, she said softly. And you don't have to do it alone. There's always room for new beginnings. For the first time in a while, James allowed himself to believe that. Maybe, just maybe, the future held more for him than he had ever imagined. Maybe, even though he couldn't change the past, he could create a future that was his own. A step toward forgiveness. A few days later, James received another unexpected message. This time, it was from his mother. James, I think it's time we talked. I know you're doing better, but I think you're ready for the next step. James had learned to trust his mother's instincts. She had been through so much in her life, and she had always been there to guide him. He texted her back, agreeing to meet for lunch the next day. As they sat together at their usual spot, his mother's eyes were filled with understanding, but also with something else, kind of gentle encouragement. You've come a long way, James, she said, her voice soft but firm. But I think it's time you considered forgiveness. Not for Lisa, not for Matt, but for you. Holding on to the anger doesn't change what happened. It just keeps you stuck. James nodded, taking in her words. He had been holding on to the anger for so long, using it as a shield, afraid to let go. But maybe his mother was right. Maybe it was time to let go, not for Lisa or Matt, but for his own peace of mind. I don't think I'm ready for that, James said quietly. But I'm thinking about it, and maybe that's the first step. His mother smiled, a knowing smile that only a mother could give. That's all I'm asking, James. Just take it one step at a time. You've got this. James stood at the edge of the Hudson River, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. The colors of the evening sky reflected off the water, casting a peaceful glow over the city. It felt like the perfect moment to reflect, to look back on everything that had happened, and to take in how far he had come. The past year had been filled with heartache, betrayal, and countless nights spent lying awake, replaying the same painful thoughts. But now, in this quiet moment, James realized something important. The pain wasn't as sharp as it once was. It hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled him. He had taken back his life, facing the truth. A week had passed since his lunch with his mother. The conversation had stayed with him, lingering in his mind, and he couldn't help but think about the idea of forgiveness. He had come so far, and yet there was still a part of him that struggled to let go of the anger that had consumed him for so long. He had thought he was moving on, but the truth was, he wasn't entirely free. As he sat there by the river, he pulled out his phone, and, for the first time in months, he found himself drafting a message to Lisa. He had spent so much of his energy running away from the past, avoiding it, ignoring the people who had hurt him. But he realized now that in order to fully move forward, he had to face it head on. He wasn't doing this for Lisa, and he wasn't doing it for Matt. He was doing it for himself. Lisa, I don't know if this will ever make sense, but I wanted to tell you that I'm finally starting to let go. I can't change what happened, and I can't forget it. But I've realized I don't want to carry the anger anymore. I'm moving on. I hope you find peace, too. James read the message over and over. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation, nor was it an invitation to pick up where they had left off. It was a statement of closure. He didn't need an apology. He didn't need anything from her. He needed to let go of the hurt. He pressed send. The power of closure. The next morning, his phone buzzed. A reply from Lisa. James braced himself for whatever it might say, but when he opened it, he was surprised by how simple it was. James, I'm so sorry for everything. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I respect your decision. I hope you find what you're looking for. James read the message again, absorbing the sincerity behind it. For a moment, he was taken aback. It wasn't the apology he had imagined, nor did it change the hurt he had felt, but it was real. Lisa had finally acknowledged the gravity of her actions. And that acknowledgement, while small, was the closure he needed. He set the phone down and let out a long breath. He had done it. He had faced the past, and in doing so, he had freed himself from its grip. For the first time in a long time, James felt a sense of peace settle over him. It was a quiet peace, but it was enough. A future with Emily. A few days later, Emily invited James to dinner. They had been growing closer, their friendship slowly evolving into something more. Neither of them rushed into anything, but there was an undeniable connection between them. Their conversations were easy, filled with laughter and shared stories, and James found himself enjoying the simplicity of being around someone who truly understood him. They sat at a small table in a cozy restaurant, the candlelight flickering between them as they sipped wine. Emily's eyes sparkled as she talked about a recent trip she had taken, but there was something in the way she looked at James' warmth, a quiet understanding that made him feel like he was exactly where he needed to be. "I've been thinking," Emily said, her voice softer now, as she leaned across the table slightly, "about what you said the other day, about how you've been moving on, finding closure." James nodded. "It's been a long road. I'm not sure I'm completely healed, but I'm getting there. It's a work in progress." Emily smiled, her hand reaching across the table to gently touch his. "I admire that. The way you've handled everything. And I think you're ready for the next chapter. Not just in your career or with your friends, but with yourself. You've come so far, James." James looked at her, feeling something shift inside of him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that Emily had been there for him in ways that no one else had. She hadn't pressured him, hadn't asked him to move on faster than he was ready to. She had simply been there, offering him a safe place to heal. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being patient with me, for letting me find my own way." "You don't have to thank me," Emily replied, her voice soft. "I just want you to be happy, James. You deserve it." In that moment, James realized that the future wasn't about waiting for the past to heal on its own. It was about taking the steps forward, one by one, and allowing himself to move into a future filled with possibilities. He wasn't sure where this new chapter with Emily would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to embrace it. The first step into the unknown. A few weeks later, as James stood in front of his apartment building, looking up at the familiar structure, he felt a sense of finality. The apartment had been his home for so long during the highs and lows of his relationship with Lisa, through the heartbreak and the anger, and now, through his journey of healing. But it was time for something new. James had decided it was time to move. Not just to a new apartment, but to a new life. He had done what he could here. He had learned what he needed to learn, and now it was time to leave behind the remnants of the past and build a future that was entirely his own. The next chapter of his life wasn't going to be defined by betrayal. It wasn't going to be defined by what had happened to him. It would be shaped by who he was becoming a man, who had faced loss, who had embraced healing, and who was finally ready to trust again. James smiled to himself as he grabbed his bags, his heart lighter than it had been in months. As he turned to walk down the street, he didn't look back at the apartment. He didn't need to. The future was waiting for him, and for the first time in a long time, he was ready to take that first step into the unknown.